What if the person you trusted the most just destroyed your entire life and smiled while doing it? My name is Meredith Caldwell, and the night my husband told the world he was disgusted by me wasn't a tragedy. It was a reveal. We were celebrating our 10th anniversary in the Grand Riverton Ballroom, the kind of place with ceilings so high your voice disappears into them. Every guest wore black tie. The crystal glasses clinked against monogrammed plates. Chandeliers shimmered like we were inside a diamond. I had planned every detail of that night like it was a royal gala because that's what he wanted. Perfection, illusion, control. And I gave it to him. I wore the same perfume I did on our wedding day. My hair was in the exact style from the ceremony. The gold-accented place cards had our family crest stamped in wax. Guests murmured about how elegant it all was. How timeless we looked. The power couple, he, the brilliant financial executive, I, the heir to the Caldwell legacy. But beneath the dress, the diamonds and the practiced smile was a storm I had been waiting to unleash. You see, Owen had no idea what I had discovered. And he sure as hell had no idea I was done pretending. When he stood up to give the anniversary toast, I watched every tick of muscle in his jaw. He tapped his glass the way he always did to command attention. All eyes turned to him. Owen loved moments like this when he was the center of a well-curated universe. He looked over the crowd, then straight at me. And then, he said it. I've been disgusted by you since our first night together. There was a sound. Not quite a gasp, more like a ripple of disbelief. Someone dropped a fork. My great-aunt choked on her wine. And yet, I didn't move. I didn't flinch. He smirked, as if waiting for me to cry, to scream, to break. But instead, I stood up, brushed a non-existent wrinkle from my champagne silk dress, and turned calmly to the technician at the side of the room. Just as we rehearsed. A slight nod. That was all. The lights dimmed. The pianist missed a note and stopped. The projector screen behind the band lit up in white. Owen's smirk faltered. "What's this?" he muttered. His hand trembled slightly as he gripped the stem of his glass. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The screen flickered to black. Then a soft golden title appeared in serif letters, 10 Years of Truth. The room, which had just moments before been filled with murmurs and tension, went still. You could hear the click of someone's heels shifting under the table. And then our wedding video began, but not the one we had edited years ago. No. This was a version he had never seen. Me in my dress, twirling slowly, laughing. And him, frozen, unsmiling, distant. Guests leaned forward, unsure if this was still part of the program or something far more personal. Far more dangerous. His voice broke the silence again, low and uneasy. "Meredith, what is this?" I still hadn't looked at him, because that was just the beginning. This wasn't a story about heartbreak. This was a reckoning. And if you've ever sat in silence while someone tried to shatter you, if you've ever waited quietly collecting proof while they underestimated you, I see you. You're not alone in that room. If this story already feels like a mirror to something you've lived through even a little, I hope you'll stay. Drop a like if it resonates so far, and let's walk through the rest together. Because the woman he tried to humiliate, she's about to take everything back. And this was only the opening act. The screen faded into a soft dissolve, shifting from the muted tones of our wedding to something far more calculated. It was no longer a celebration of union, it was a confession wrapped in nostalgia. The guests weren't watching a memory anymore. They were witnessing evidence. As Owen's voice had just finished slicing through the air with his cruel words, the video now began slicing back. A recording from just 3 nights earlier flickered into view. The angle was high, discreet, but clear. Owen sat in our living room, casually sipping a whiskey, laughing into his phone. "You're seriously still going through with the anniversary thing?" a woman's voice asked, amused. "I told you. It's her circus." "Let her have it," he replied, voice smug and completely unfiltered. "Besides, the more elaborate it is, the more satisfying it'll be to tear it down." The crowd collectively stiffened. Some glanced at me. Some turned away. My mother covered her mouth again. One of Owen's business partners shook his head in disbelief. The champagne that once flowed with elegance now tasted like acid. Owen stood abruptly. "Enough," he barked, pointing at the screen. "Turn that off." But it didn't turn off, because he didn't control the narrative anymore. That night, I made sure the man who believed he had all the power realized that I was never a pawn. I was the one setting the board. The screen shifted again. Text messages faded into view. Screenshots with timestamps. Messages between Owen and a woman named Marissa, his 29-year-old junior advisor. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning a transition. A hostile one. One message from Owen read, "She's too caught up in being the perfect wife to see anything. After the anniversary, the accounts go under my name. Marissa gets the Greenwich property. I'll freeze Meredith out before she even notices." The guests squirmed. One of his cousins dropped her phone. A few board members at the back stood up silently and slipped out of the room. And still I didn't speak. I let the truth do the talking. Owen grabbed my arm. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed through clenched teeth. I turned slowly and looked him in the eyes for the first time that evening. Just watching the truth catch up, I said quietly, "Don't worry, we're only halfway." He opened his mouth to speak again, but the next scene began. This one was raw. A hidden camera embedded inside our kitchen nook captured a moment so unguarded that even I had forgotten it existed. I was pouring tea one morning, standing silently as Owen rifled through his briefcase, muttering to himself. Marissa's name flashed on his phone. He didn't notice me watching. He never did. He just mumbled, "She still thinks I love her. God, she's exhausting." And for once, I saw myself the way he saw me, tiring, disposable, an obstacle. But then something clicked inside me. And instead of fighting him, I started documenting him. That's what this entire evening was. This wasn't vengeance. It was preservation. And now, as the whispers grew louder and Owen's image began to fade in the public eye, right in front of the very people who had once admired him, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they could shape your life without consequence, tell me in the comments, have you ever held your silence while planning your strength? Because sometimes survival isn't loud, it's quiet, it's deliberate. Tonight wasn't about theatrics. It was about truth. And Owen was finally facing it, one humiliating frame at a time. 3 days before the gala, the plan hadn't even formed yet. I wasn't hunting for revenge. I wasn't scheming. I just had a migraine. That morning had started like any other. I poured coffee in our spotless white kitchen while Owen spoke loudly on the phone with one of his junior partners, tossing around phrases like strategic assets and equity dilution. I kissed our daughter Harper goodbye as she left for school, then rubbed my temples and told Owen I needed to lie down. He barely acknowledged me, just gave a distracted nod while scrolling through emails. By noon I was back. And the house was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like someone had pressed pause on the entire world. There were no sounds from the cleaning service, no voice calls bouncing off the hallway walls. Just silence. I walked into the bedroom to change into something more comfortable. That's when I saw it. Owen's phone, unlocked, alone. That never happened. Owen guarded that phone like it held nuclear codes. He even took it into the shower. I stood there for a second, staring at it like it might bite me if I touched it. And then, against my better judgment but fully trusting my gut, I picked it up. The screen lit up with a preview text. "Can't wait to see you in red tonight. It's your color. Sender M." I didn't need to guess who it was. I didn't breathe. I just stared. Then with hands I usually used to organize gala spreadsheets and sign charitable pledges, I opened the phone. I tried his passcode just once, half expecting it to fail. But it didn't. It was still Harper's birthday. He was arrogant enough to believe I'd never try. The message thread unfolded like a nightmare written in real time. Photos, voice notes, plans. The first message I saw read, She doesn't have a clue. Does she, poor thing, still thinks you're working late? Owen had replied, let her have her big anniversary moment. After that, we're done pretending. That phrase stuck in my mind, done pretending. Not because it was cruel, but because it was accurate. Only he didn't know that I had stopped pretending too. Another message. What about the prenup? His reply chilled me. My lawyer says if I wait until after the gala I can claim half. She won't know what hit her. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the screen like it was a weapon. Because in that moment it was. The photos were worse. Him and Marissa at restaurants I'd never been to. In hotels I didn't recognize. One of her in what was unmistakably my robe. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even delete the texts. I just placed the phone back down exactly as I found it. Then I stood up and walked into the bathroom. I turned on the faucet. I stared at my reflection. And I said 4 words that felt like a vow. You chose this war. That afternoon I made a call. Not to a friend, not to a lawyer. To someone I hadn't seen in years, someone who once helped my father uncover a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. His name was James Reddick, a former federal investigator, now private. When he picked up the phone, I skipped the pleasantries. James, it's Meredith Caldwell. I need to meet. That night, we sat in the back of a quiet Italian restaurant on 62nd Street. I told him everything. I laid it out like a case file, cold, calm, deliberate. When I finished, he looked me dead in the eyes and asked, "What do you want to do?" I didn't hesitate. I want to expose everything. I want dates, locations, logs, conversations, and I want it airtight. He leaned back, a small smile forming at the edge of his mouth. This won't be cheap. I didn't blink. It's not about money. It's about truth. And if you've ever reached a point where knowing the truth mattered more than preserving the peace, tell me below, have you ever chosen clarity over comfort? Because I did. And it changed everything. James didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, he delivered the first binder. Slim black leather sealed with a red elastic band and no label, just the weight of quiet truths tucked inside. He handed it to me at a coffee shop near Midtown, the kind of place no one ever pays attention to. No emails, no digital trails. He was old school like that, and thank God for it. I took it home and waited until Harper had fallen asleep and our nanny was gone for the evening. Then I poured myself a glass of wine I wouldn't drink and opened the binder in my study. The soft light from the sconces barely reached the corners of the room, but I didn't need much light to read what was in front of me. The first page wasn't about Marissa. It was about Owen. 10 years ago, he stood outside a bankrupt fintech startup in Brooklyn, holding a box of what was left of his career. The company had just folded. Taped to the glass door behind him was a foreclosure notice. The date, 3 months before he met me. The next page was a timeline. My breath hitched as I read. March. Owen's startup collapses. April. He attends a gala hosted by Caldwell International. April 22nd. Meets Meredith Caldwell. April 28th. Sends first email to himself with subject line Langford entry points. May begins dating me. I flipped through more. Notes, background searches, social media patterns. He didn't fall for me. He tracked me. Each page turned heavier than the last. There were outlines of our shared vacations locations. I picked topics I loved, places my father owned properties in. He had researched my world and then stepped into it like an actor memorizing a script. He introduced himself at a gallery showing I thought was a coincidence. It wasn't. The guest list was published online. He'd read it. He followed me there, initiated conversation, mimicked my interests. He didn't fall in love. He infiltrated. There was even a photo from the early days of our relationship, Owen grinning at my side at a vineyard. I remembered thinking how spontaneous that trip had felt. Turns out he booked that exact location 3 weeks prior after seeing it featured in an article I'd shared on Instagram. It was all engineered. And then I reached the page that changed everything. A printed email to his former college roommate, The subject line, insurance. The body read, "Marrying Meredith isn't just love, it's leverage. Her name, her network, her money. Once her father retires, I'll be positioned to run the company from within. She'll never see it coming. She's too soft, too idealistic. But she needs someone strong. I'll be that." On paper, I couldn't breathe for a moment. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was strategic. He didn't just cheat on me. He architected my illusion, every dinner, every kiss, every anniversary toast. All of it had been theater. And maybe worst of all, he thought I was weak enough to never realize. I closed the binder with hands that trembled. Then I stood, walked to the mirror in the hallway, looked at myself long and hard. He called me soft. He called me blind. He had no idea who I was. The next morning, I called James again. "I want to make a film," I said. He paused. "A film. A story," I corrected. "He wants to use our anniversary as the perfect exit. Let's make it his debut instead." If you've ever discovered that your entire reality was a performance, someone else scripted, tell me. Below, how did you reclaim the pen? How did you take the story back into your hands? Because I wasn't going to burn the script. I was going to direct the ending myself. I told Owen I wanted to make a video for Harper. That's how I framed it. Simple, sweet, sentimental. For our 10th anniversary, I said, brushing a hand along his arm at dinner. Something she can watch when she's older. You know, us talking about love, about our journey, what it took to make it this far. He looked up from his glass of Pinot, surprised but intrigued. He was always partial to legacy, to curated appearances, like a documentary. Exactly. I nodded, smiling like it was still real. He didn't suspect a thing. What he didn't know was that James had already hired a discreet crew. Not wedding videographers, former federal surveillance contractors turned documentary freelancers. People who knew how to hide microphones in boutonnieres and plant high-definition cameras without drawing attention. They came with confidentiality agreements so tight you'd think they were filming a state secret. We staged 3 interviews, one in our garden, one in his office, one in the living room on the couch we had picked out from a catalog years ago. In each setting, I asked him questions like I was recording a memoir. "When did you know I was the one?" He answered like a man reciting lines. "The night we danced at the Caldwell Winter Gala. You looked like you belonged in another century." I smiled at the camera, but I already had the receipt showing he planned that encounter 3 weeks in advance. "What do you think has made us last?" I asked. He looked straight into the lens. "Trust. We trust each other. Always have." It was astonishing. His ability to lie with such ease, such softness. A masterclass in deceit. And I let him deliver his monologue uninterrupted because the footage wasn't for me. It was for the people he'd tried to manipulate. It was for the company board, for the lawyers, for Harper someday, and for the guests who'd sit in stunned silence at our anniversary while the screen flickered with every pixel of his performance. I made sure to ask him one more thing too. "What would you say to our daughter if she asked you what love means?" His reply, "Love means showing up, being present, protecting each other's hearts." It almost made me laugh, because as he said it, our daughter wasn't even living with us anymore. I had quietly moved Harper to my mother's home in upstate New York 2 days prior. I told her we were going on a little adventure just until Mommy finished planning the big party. Harper didn't ask questions. She just packed her stuffed fox and asked if Grandma would have blueberry muffins. She was the only reason I waited as long as I did. The morning of the anniversary, I stood in front of the mirror in my dressing room at the St. Augustine Hotel. My stylist zipped the back of my gown deep sapphire, not white this time. I wasn't the bride. I was the reckoning. She said, "You look powerful." I nodded. Not radiant, not beautiful. Powerful. As I touched up my lipstick, I whispered to myself, "This isn't revenge. This is restoration." And if you've ever had to prepare for your own version of the truth, silently, methodically, for days or even years, drop a comment. How did you hold your composure knowing everything was about to change? Because I knew what Owen didn't. He thought the anniversary was his curtain call. He didn't realize I had rewritten the entire act. He arrived early. Of course he did. Owen always liked to be the first to enter a room so he could control how it saw him. When I stepped into the Grand Pearl Ballroom that evening, he was already at the center of it all, shaking hands with donors, nodding politely to CEOs who once idolized my father. And there, glued to his arm like an accessory she didn't deserve to be, was Marissa. She wore a red satin gown so tight it looked vacuum-sealed. A deliberate choice. She wanted to be noticed. And she was. Whispers moved through the room like smoke. Isn't that his assistant? Wait, where's Harper? Did Meredith really invite her? Yes, I had. I insisted, in fact. She's part of your team, I had said with a soft, practiced smile. It's only fair. I greeted them like a seasoned hostess. You made it, I said warmly. Marissa blinked. She wasn't prepared for my calm. Owen narrowed his eyes. You look different, he said slowly. Lighter, I replied. Must be the lighting. Every detail that night was orchestrated, not just the ambiance, but the message behind it. The flower arrangements matched Harper's middle name, Iris. The piano music was a blend of songs Owen claimed to hate. The place cards were monogrammed under Caldwell, not Lockwood, his surname, which I had never legally adopted and never would. As we made our way to the head table, my mother gave me a searching look. She knew something was off. She didn't know what, but after years of watching me bend, fold, and stay quiet, she saw it. This version of me was made of something unrecognizable. Harper wasn't there, of course. I had told everyone she was at her grandparents' house for a school project. The truth was, I didn't want her to see what I was about to do. She was too young to understand destruction even when it was deserved. Dinner moved forward like theater. Courses were served with silver-lidded precision. Glasses were refilled before they were empty. Laughter rose at scripted intervals, but underneath it all, I could feel the breathlessness of anticipation building like a string section before a crescendo. Finally, Owen stood for his toast. His hand tapped the rim of his glass twice, his signature move. He flashed his most practiced smile. To love, to legacy, to 10 incredible years. And that was the cue. The lights dimmed. A hush fell. Marissa straightened in her seat, smiling like a pageant queen waiting for her crown. But it wasn't her coronation. It was his undoing. The screen behind the quartet came to life. Owen's face from 10 years ago, before the suits, before the charm, young, cocky, sitting in a dingy apartment, drink in hand, laughing with someone off-screen. Of course I married her, he said, raising his glass. You think I'd pass up a Caldwell? That family name is worth more than any startup. She's sweet, gullible, the kind of woman who signs before she asks. Gasps. Then silence. Forks froze midair. Someone dropped a napkin. I watched Owen's smile falter. His breath caught. His hands tensed at his sides. He turned to me. Meredith, he growled. Turn it off. But I didn't move. I whispered just loud enough for him to hear. This is your moment, darling. Enjoy it. Have you ever watched someone finally see the trap they set close around themselves? Leave a comment if you've ever stood silently while the truth exposed what you no longer had to explain. Because at that point, I had said nothing. The truth was doing all the speaking. The footage didn't end with the wedding clip. That was just the first crack in his porcelain mask. The next was sharper, cleaner. Security camera footage from the Leontine Hotel. Time-stamped, clear. Owen and Marissa exiting an elevator. She laughing, him slipping an arm around her waist. The same night, he told me he was out of town for a board retreat in Boston. The timestamp betrayed him, but the intimacy in the frame made it unforgivable. They weren't just lovers. They were co-conspirators. And every person in that room now knew it. Marissa's smile melted. Owen stood frozen, his jaw clenched. For a man who had always been so precise, so in control, he suddenly looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. And then came the moment that broke the room. A soft fade-in. Harper, our daughter, sitting cross-legged on her bed holding her stuffed fox in her lap. The lighting was warm like dusk. Her voice was small. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home?" I didn't appear in the frame, but my voice responded off-camera gentle. "He's working late tonight, sweetheart." Harper frowned, hugging her fox tighter. "He's always working late. Does he not like being here?" Silence, real silence. She whispered, barely audible, "Did I do something wrong?" A sob echoed through the ballroom, not hers, but someone from the back rows. The screen froze on Harper's tear-streaked face. The room didn't move. Then Owen exploded. "This is disgusting," he shouted, knocking his chair back. "You're using our daughter. You're manipulating people with a child." I stood slowly, not with anger, but with gravity. "Don't you dare say her name like she's a prop in your story." My voice was calm, but it cut through the ballroom like broken glass underfoot. "She's the only reason I waited this long." He tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand and the next clip rolled without mercy. Owen again. This time in a glass-walled office. His voice was hushed, but the microphone hidden in the lapel of his suit caught every syllable. "No, she won't see it coming. Once the paperwork is filed, I'll freeze the accounts. She's too busy playing mommy to notice." Someone gasped. Another stood and left the room entirely. I turned to Owen, meeting his eyes for the first time all night. "You said I was soft?" I said. His lips parted, but no words came. "You were right," I added, stepping toward him. "I was soft. But softness isn't weakness. It's restraint." From my clutch, I pulled a single envelope and handed it to him. "These are the divorce papers, signed, notarized, filed." He stared at it like it was poison. I continued, "All your access is gone. The apartment mine. The firm. The board's seen the footage. The account's frozen. And Harper." I paused. "She's safe. She's not watching this. But she will know one day." He opened his mouth, still trying to find the right line, the rehearsed comeback. And I leaned in close so only he could hear. "You once said I was too trusting, that I'd never notice. But you forgot something." I stepped back. "I've always noticed. I was just choosing when to act." If you've ever held back not out of fear, but because you were choosing your moment, drop a number in the comments. Tell me, what's the one moment you knew you'd never be silent again, because this was mine? And with that, I returned to my seat, lifted my glass, and whispered, "To truth." The room followed. I thought that was the end. That moment, standing in front of Owen, handing him the papers, watching his entire foundation crack beneath him, felt like the final crescendo. 10 years of silence, of sacrifice, of swallowing doubts and doubts about my own instincts had led to this symphonic conclusion. The screen faded to black. The lights remained dim. And still, no one moved. But I had no idea the night had one last surprise. Just as people began shifting in their seats, murmuring, unsure whether to clap or cry or simply breathe again, someone stood. I hadn't seen him in years. He wasn't on the guest list. No press had mentioned his arrival. But there he was, tall, silver-haired, impeccably tailored in a navy three-piece suit. Henry Alcott, my father's oldest friend, Owen's former mentor, and the chairman of Caldwell Industries. His presence alone silenced the room more than any footage ever could. He stepped forward, holding a small leather folio in his hand. The Caldwell crest gleamed under the ballroom lights. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," he began, voice steady. "But after what we've all just witnessed, I think it's time we finish what Meredith started." Owen turned sharply. "Henry." But Henry held up a hand. "You didn't just lie to your wife, Owen. You lied to this company. You signed conflict of interest disclosures swearing your relationship with Miss Marissa Whitley was professional. You denied financial ties. You claimed impartiality while promoting her, awarding bonuses and granting restricted share transfers." He opened the folio and removed a single sheet. "The documentation is thorough and damning." Owen took a step forward. "You can't just—" "I'm not accusing," Henry snapped, cutting him off. "I'm removing." The air sucked out of the room. Owen looked around for an ally. No one met his eye, not even Marissa. especially not Marissa, who had silently retreated 2 steps toward the edge of the table, her hands now folded tightly in front of her. Henry turned to me then. Your father always said you had the sharpest mind in the room, that you only needed time to realize it. He slid the leather folio toward me. These are executive control documents. Your name is on them now. My hands didn't tremble. Not this time. I opened the folder and found my father's handwriting on the final page. The signatures had already been witnessed. All I had to do was add mine. I looked up at Owen. He was pale, still, empty. We're done here, I said. But the night wasn't done with him. Just as guests began shifting again, reaching for their purses, preparing to process everything in the privacy of their own quiet car rides home, a side door opened, and 3 uniformed officers stepped in. Their presence didn't shout. It simply existed. Calm. Inevitable. Mr. Owen Lockwood I said, stepping forward. We need you to come with us. A beat passed. For what? Owen barked, his voice cracking. A bad marriage. The officer didn't blink. Fraud, insider trading, misuse of company funds, gasps, handcuffs. A collective pause in the room as they led him out, the man who had built his identity around untouchability suddenly very, very human. And if you've ever watched someone fall from the pedestal they built with lies, tell me, how did it feel? Did you mourn, or did you breathe for the first time? Share below. As the doors closed behind him, I felt the weight lift, not all at once, but piece by piece. The silence that followed was not empty. It was cleansing. The ballroom emptied slowly like a theater after the final act. No applause, no encore, just the quiet sound of shoes on marble and glasses left half full. No one spoke to Marissa. Not one soul. She stood near the back wall, her hands still trembling as she clutched her tiny red purse, now so offensively bright under the dimmed lights. The room had decided she wasn't part of the story anymore. And if she ever was, it was only as a footnote, one that most people would prefer to forget. I remained in place for a while, standing at the center of it all amid gold tablecloths and scattered petals, feeling the echoes of everything that had just unfolded. I should have felt victorious, liberated, triumphant, but I felt hollow. It wasn't sadness. It was something more muted. The way silence sounds different after thunder. The media fallout began before midnight. My phone buzzed incessantly on the ride back to my parents' townhouse. News alerts, messages from board members, texts from people I hadn't spoken to since college suddenly checking in. Photos and video clips leaked within hours. The headline that hit the hardest: heir to Caldwell Empire destroys husband's career in one night. By noon the next day, the phrase ballroom betrayal was trending in 3 states. But I didn't care, because upstairs Harper was playing with my mother, humming to herself, her stuffed fox tucked safely beside her on the windowsill. She didn't know the details. She just knew Daddy wouldn't be home for a while, and that Mommy had cried in the bathtub the night before, not out of heartbreak but out of exhaustion. I had told her something simple when she asked why we weren't going home. I want you to be somewhere peaceful, I said. She nodded, then whispered, Can Foxy come too? That was the moment that broke me, not the divorce papers, not the courtroom sketches of Owen's arrest, not the grainy footage of him being cuffed in front of the people he once tried so hard to impress, but that. Her innocence. Her quiet belief that peace was something you could choose, like which toy to pack for a trip. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat in the kitchen with James. He had stopped by with one final delivery, a manila envelope marked confidential. This is everything, he said, setting it on the table. Financial breakdowns, travel logs, wire transfers, and a few offshore accounts that don't quite follow SEC regulations. I stared at the envelope for a moment before asking, will it help the prosecution? James nodded. They've already opened a case file, and from what I hear, your testimony might not even be necessary. The documents speak for themselves. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then he added, I found something else. He hesitated, sliding the folder an inch closer to me. Back section, page 42. I waited until he left before opening it. The pages flipped past, spreadsheets, screenshots, emails, receipts. And then, buried deep beneath the facts, was a scanned letter, dated 2 years before our wedding. From Owen, to someone named Eliza Harper. Subject line: prenuptial agreement strategy. My blood ran cold. I reread the letter again and again, unable to believe what I was seeing. It wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditation. And suddenly, I knew the next part of this story wasn't about Owen anymore. It was about her. And if you've ever uncovered a second villain in your story, someone hidden, someone you once trusted, share it in the comments. Was it a friend, a mentor? What did it take to face them? Because now it wasn't just about closure. It was about confrontation. Eliza Harper. The name sat like a rusted nail in the back of my mind, familiar, sharp, and buried just deep enough to avoid inspection until now. I hadn't thought of her in years. She was once a fixture at Caldwell legal meetings, always poised, always precise. One of those women whose silence carried more weight than most people's words. She had been on my father's legal team during the early transition of company ownership. She was also the one who had handled my prenup with Owen. At the time, I had trusted her. She'd handed me papers with a polite smile, made soft comments about protection on both sides, and walked me through the clauses with the kind of detachment that made it feel standard. I didn't question her intentions. I was too in love, too focused on wedding menus and floral arrangements. But the letter in James's folder painted a very different picture. It opened with Dearest E, and it closed with Yours O. In between were paragraphs written like a battle plan. Owen outlined exactly how marrying into the Caldwell family would grant him access to restricted voting shares, silent equity, and soft leverage over internal decision-making. He referred to me not as a person, but as a gateway to strategic assets. I wasn't a partner in his future. I was inventory. He referenced conversations with Eliza about crafting a prenup favorable to long-term flexibility and ensuring Meredith feels protected while still retaining loophole access. In one sickening paragraph, he described me as emotionally trusting, easy to soothe, slow to suspect. I stared at that line until the ink blurred. The betrayal cut twice. Owen had deceived me, but Eliza had orchestrated the blueprint. And suddenly memories began to return. Eliza's subtle glances, her hesitation when my father brought up succession plans, the way she left Caldwell shortly after Owen and I married, citing a conflict of priorities. No, she didn't leave. She cashed out. I met with James the next morning in a quiet corner of a cafe on the Upper East Side. Tell me everything, I said, sliding the letter across the table. What do you know about her? James didn't hesitate. Eliza Harper, former Caldwell legal strategist, left 6 months post-wedding, currently sits on the board of a hedge fund operated by, wait for it, Marissa Whitley. I blinked. She and Marissa are connected. He nodded. Turns out Owen was never working alone. Marissa was the bait. Eliza was the architect. The nausea was immediate. My entire marriage hadn't just been a lie, it had been a project. My love, my child, my legacy, all woven into a plan I wasn't even meant to question. I asked the one question I had been avoiding. Do you think my father knew? James looked at me quietly for a beat, then shook his head. Your father wasn't blind. He might not have known everything, but I think he suspected. That's probably why he never fully handed over control. Why your name stayed on the voting rights. He was protecting you the only way he could, by staying a step ahead. It was too much. I excused myself to the restroom and stood at the sink, gripping the edge of the marble basin. I stared at my reflection, same eyes, same mouth. But something inside had shifted permanently. This wasn't about loss anymore. This was about exposure. And I would not let the woman who helped turn my life into a transaction walk away untouched. If you've ever had to look at someone you once trusted and accept they were part of your downfall, share your story below. Sometimes healing begins when we stop calling it betrayal and start calling it strategy. Because Eliza Harper may have written the contract, but I was about to void it publicly. It didn't take long to find the perfect stage. The Women's Executive Alliance was hosting their annual Autumn Gala, a black tie event held at the historic Greystone Conservatory, where the city's most influential female leaders gathered to celebrate progress and power. Normally, I'd send a donation and politely decline the invite. I preferred to support from the sidelines. But this year, I wasn't watching from the shadows. Because this year, Eliza Harper wasn't just attending. She was the keynote speaker. Her topic, ethical leadership in modern corporate law. The irony was so rich, it made me laugh aloud when I read the program. James made a few quiet calls. The media frenzy surrounding Owen's arrest had elevated my name to something close to myth. The Phoenix wife, one outlet called me, the woman who burned down the lie, without raising her voice. I didn't care for the titles, but I understood their use, and I knew how to leverage them. The organizers were thrilled to give me a speaking slot. Something short, inspiring, they said. 5 minutes max. 4 is plenty, I replied. The night of the gala, I wore navy silk. No sequins, no flash. Just elegance and silence. 2 weapons I now knew how to wield well. I arrived late deliberately just as the main course was being cleared. All eyes turned when I walked in. Some faces wore sympathy, some curiosity, a few recognition, awe, maybe even fear. I wasn't concerned with any of them. I only cared about the woman seated alone at the front corner table, scrolling through her phone with deliberate calm. Eliza Harper. She hadn't aged, still pristine, still cold, still pretending she wasn't part of a storm she had once conjured. The event chair smiled as I approached the podium. The room stilled. Eliza finally looked up. Our eyes met 1 second, no more, and I knew she knew. I began slowly. Good evening. When I was first asked to speak tonight, I wasn't sure I belonged here. For years, I let other people define my narrative, my success, even my silence. I paused, scanning the room not for drama, but for truth. But recent events have taught me something. Power isn't just about position. It's about permission. And I've stopped asking for it. I let my gaze drift briefly to Eliza. I was married to a man who orchestrated a legacy not through love, but through leverage. And he didn't act alone. Eliza's fork paused midair. Behind every scheme is someone with a title, a voice that pretends neutrality while drafting betrayal. I didn't name her. I didn't have to. The thing about trust is it's silent until it breaks. And then it becomes deafening. I closed with a line I hadn't practiced because it came from somewhere deeper than any rehearsal. To those who weaponize contracts instead of compassion, to those who sit beside us, while writing us out of our own lives, we see you now. And seeing is the first step toward justice. The applause wasn't loud. It was sharp, precise. The kind of sound that cuts through facades. I didn't linger. I didn't wait for Eliza to approach. She didn't. She sat frozen behind a glass of untouched wine, her face pale beneath the golden lighting. If you've ever confronted the quiet villain in your story, not with shouting, but with truth, tell me below. What did you say that finally set you free? Because sometimes the most powerful statement is not saying their name at all. I left the conservatory without looking back. She didn't follow. I thought I had closed the chapter. That moment at the conservatory felt like resolution, public, symbolic, almost cinematic. But closure doesn't always announce itself like a standing ovation. Sometimes it hides in vaults, in old drawers, in a name written in handwriting you haven't seen since childhood. 3 days after the gala, I received a call from James. There's something I need to show you, he said. His voice, usually dry and unshakable, had a weight to it this time. Something your father left behind. It's important. I hadn't stepped foot in my father's old office at Caldwell HQ since the funeral. Not since the board swept in and offered Owen a temporary advisory seat, when I now knew he'd manipulated his way into. That office had been sacred once, intimidating. The kind of room where power lived in silence behind steel drawer handles and antique cigar boxes. But now I had the keys. We entered through the private elevator. The old security guard nodded at me like he wasn't quite sure if I was a memory or a successor. James led me through the heavy oak doors across the office and down a narrow staircase hidden behind the floor-to-ceiling bookcase. I remembered that door. I used to play beside it while my father dictated to his assistant. The vault smelled of paper and dust and legacy. James opened a drawer labeled only with a single initial V. Inside a small black box and a sealed envelope, my father's script elegant firm addressed to me. Victoria, if you're reading this, then what I feared has come to pass. I sat down in the worn leather chair beside the vault's corner desk and opened it. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. I suspected Owen was not who he claimed to be. I didn't know the full extent, but I saw enough to act. Attached are 2 items: 1, a revised prenuptial agreement, one that voids his claim to your inheritance. You never signed it. He did. That's all that matters. I unfolded the document. It was crystal clear. My father had rewritten it before the wedding and arranged for Owen to sign under the illusion of minor adjustments. Legal, ironclad, and enforceable. I swallowed hard. The second item was a business card, tucked behind the last page. James Reddick, Private Investigations. I laughed. Actually laughed. You old fox, I whispered. You sent him. You planned this. Miles hadn't been a coincidence. He had been planted. Years ago. Before I ever knew I'd need him. My father had done what fathers do best. He protected me quietly. Strategically. Not by stopping the storm, but by laying escape routes in stone before the clouds even formed. I wiped a tear I didn't remember releasing. The next morning, I stood in the Caldwell boardroom. For the first time, not as someone's daughter or someone's wife, but as the CEO. I delivered a short statement, then signed the final set of succession documents. The room applauded politely, some out of respect, some out of calculation. It didn't matter. I wasn't there to impress them. I was there to reclaim what should have never been up for negotiation. That evening, I sat in my new apartment, nothing fancy, just quiet. Harper painted on the wall beside me, drawing stars and forests, and a fox she insisted looked like hers. Can Grandma see it when she visits? She asked. Of course, I smiled. Grandma would love it. If you've ever discovered that someone long gone had been protecting you all along, tell me, what did you find? A letter. A message. A gesture that made you feel held even years later. Drop it below. Because sometimes love doesn't stop betrayal, but it teaches you how to survive it. And that's what this was. Survival, reinvention, and the quiet victory of knowing I wasn't alone, even when I thought I was. Weeks passed. The media storm didn't fade, it transformed. Owen's face stopped showing up in tabloid spreads and started appearing in courtroom sketches. Legal analysts picked apart the case on morning television, while financial blogs dissected how Caldwell Industries had avoided a full-blown collapse. His name became a cautionary tale in boardrooms that once toasted him with aged scotch. As for Marissa, she vanished. Rumors of a plea deal swirled along with whispers of her stepping down from the hedge fund Eliza once advised. No press release, no farewell interview, just absence. Eliza Harper, too, dissolved into silence. She resigned from every board she once chaired, citing family matters and emotional strain. I never heard from her again. Not a call, not an apology. But I didn't need one. Some endings don't require confrontation, just exposure, and the light of truth tends to bleach everything bare. I moved forward not with fanfare but with intention. Harper and I found a new apartment downtown, a loft with wide windows and no memories clinging to the walls. No expensive portraits, no curated bookshelves designed for guests. Just space, light, and peace. One rainy afternoon, Miles dropped by again. He didn't text ahead. He just knocked a white envelope in hand. Last piece of the puzzle, he said, stepping inside. Came from a contact inside the DA's office. Thought you'd want it. I opened it after he left. It was a printed statement. Owens. From his second interrogation, not public, not admissible, just honest. Only one line stood out. I thought I could outsmart her. I never thought she'd fight back. I folded the page, slid it into the back of my journal. Not for anger, not even for history. Just to remind myself that underestimation is a powerful weapon, but not always for the person wielding it. That Saturday, Harper and I painted a mural in her bedroom. Foxes and forests and constellations. She told me she wanted to make the stars dance like real ones. I let her choose every color. She asked, "Can Daddy see it when he comes back?" I paused, met her eyes. "He won't be coming back here, sweetheart. But one day if you want, you can show it to him." She nodded. "Okay, but only if he says sorry." I kissed her forehead. My mother visited the next day. She was quieter now. Not the sharp, pristine woman who once urged me to just work through it when Owen missed dinner again or forgot our anniversary. No, this version of her had softened. Maybe she saw now what I had endured. Or maybe she finally recognized her own complicity in the silence. Either way, she helped Harper hang glow-in-the-dark stars above her bed that evening. And when Harper fell asleep, she turned to me and said, "Your father would be proud." I didn't answer. I just believed her. If you've ever emerged from betrayal not with rage, but with a quiet kind of grace, tell me. What did it look like for you? Was it painting with your child? Making a home that felt like yours? Leave a comment. Because healing doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. And in those whispers, we begin again. I returned to the conservatory weeks later. Not for revenge, not for spectacle. Just a fundraiser. A quiet charity dinner hosted by the city's Arts Foundation, a cause I'd supported for years, but never had the time or presence to fully attend. This time, I showed up late on purpose like before. But unlike before, I wasn't walking in as a woman hiding behind her husband's last name or her family's legacy. I was walking in as myself, the CEO, the mother, the survivor. And perhaps most important of all, the one who had stayed standing after the truth collapsed everything around her. As I moved toward the long table near the garden terrace, one of the event organizers leaned in. "You know," she whispered, smiling faintly, "they're still talking about that speech you gave." I raised an eyebrow, unsure which speech she meant. "The one where you didn't name names, but everyone felt it." I nodded slowly. "That wasn't a speech," I said. "That was a beginning." It surprised me how easily those words came out. Not bitter, not performative, just honest. Because that was the beginning, the moment I stopped allowing my story to be shaped by others and started reclaiming it one sentence at a time. After the dinner, I walked alone under the glass awnings outside. The rain had stopped, but the ground still shimmered. Streetlights reflected in puddles like small mirrors, echoes of the life I used to live. It was hard to believe I had once stood in this exact spot, terrified to confront a woman who orchestrated my betrayal. Now that same woman had disappeared from the corporate landscape like a ghost fading into fog. But her exit wasn't my closure. My closure was this: I could walk into a room without bracing myself. I could attend a gala and not wonder which smile was hiding betrayal. I could raise my daughter knowing she'd grow up watching a mother who didn't just survive deceit, she dismantled it. I opened my phone as I stepped into my car. One new email. Subject line: Langford Scholarship Fund Final Approval Notice. I smiled. Weeks ago, I had initiated the paperwork to reallocate unused inheritance funds into a scholarship in my father's name, targeted toward first-generation law students pursuing ethics and public interest work. It was time to use what was taken from me, to rebuild something better. At home that night, Harper asked me to tell her a bedtime story. "Make one up," she said, tucking Foxy under her chin. I sat beside her and said, "Okay." Once upon a time, there was a woman who everyone thought was just a quiet queen in a glass castle. Until one day she realized the walls weren't made of glass, they were made of smoke. And she stepped through. Harper blinked up at me. "Did she find dragons?" I smiled. "No, sweetie, she was the dragon." And if you've ever realized that your story didn't need rescuing, that you were your own hero all along, tell me, what moment made you see it? What choice rewrote your ending? Drop it below. Because healing isn't passive, it's a decision. And sometimes it begins with telling your story out loud. Because mine was finally mine again. The city lights outside my window flickered as if echoing the new rhythm of my life. Sitting at my desk, I opened a fresh notebook not for contracts or boardroom meetings, but for a letter. One that I hoped Harper would read one day when she was ready to understand everything. I began simply, "Harper, here's what your father did. And here's how we rose from it." Writing that letter felt like closing a loop I didn't know had been left open for so long. It wasn't about bitterness or blame. It was about truth raw and unvarnished, and the unbreakable strength that comes from owning your story no matter how painful. In the weeks that followed, life shifted into a new pattern. Owen's face was everywhere, framed in court documents and legal analyses. Marissa disappeared from public view, her resignation quietly announced. Eliza stepped down from every position she held, disappearing as swiftly as she had arrived. Some stories end quietly. Mine wasn't one of them. But through it all, Harper's laughter echoed in my new home, free of shadows, free of ghosts. Every day I reminded myself that strength isn't silence. It's the courage to speak, to stand, and to build again. I had been underestimated, undervalued. But I had learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they said I never could be, and doing it on your own terms. If there's one lesson I want to leave you with, it's this. You don't owe anyone your silence, especially not those who tried to erase you. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It's survival. It's power. It's freedom. So to anyone watching who's ever felt small, unheard, or betrayed, know this. You are not alone, and your response to your story is what will define you, not the story itself. If this resonates with you, if you're ready to reclaim your own narrative, I invite you to subscribe, share your story in the comments, and join me on this journey of strength and freedom. Because sometimes the quietest voice carries the loudest message. The road from betrayal to healing is never straight. It's a winding path filled with moments of doubt, pain, and unexpected strength. But it's also a journey worth taking. Healing isn't about forgetting the past, it's about facing it with open eyes and an unyielding heart. It's about learning that your worth is not determined by others' actions, but by how you choose to rise above them. Freedom comes when you decide to break the chains of silence and claim your voice. It's a quiet revolution, one that begins in the soul and spreads outward in courage. And remember, reclaiming your story doesn't mean walking the path alone. We are stronger together. Sharing your truth, finding your tribe, and knowing you are not alone can transform the darkest moments into the brightest dawns. So whether you are standing at the crossroads of pain and hope, or walking bravely down the path of renewal, know that your story matters, your voice matters, your freedom matters. Thank you for trusting me with mine. Here's to the power of resilience, the strength of truth, and the unbreakable spirit within us all.